Another topic that I'd like to discuss with you is the Salisbury wastewater treatment plant. Several years ago, I had received a tip from a close friend of mine in reference to what he called a sludge pit down at the wastewater treatment plant. And like you're probably thinking right now, if you haven't been informed about this information, what the heck is a sludge pit? That's the first thing I said to him, and he replied it was human feces that was buried in a pit down at the wastewater treatment plant. And I said, come on. And he says, no, absolutely, Joe, really, this is straight up, you know, blah, blah, blah. And he knew all about it, he had been there, he'd seen it. And I said, this is right at the facility. He said, yeah, right at the facility. So I said, I've never been there. Can you kind of draw me a map? So he did, and he wrote down all the information, and I got in my truck, I left his office, and I drove to the wastewater treatment plant. I drove right through all the new construction, and there was nothing then like it is today that you see there, and pulled right up to the main office, pulled my truck in front of the main office, got out of my truck, put the camera around my neck, and just started walking. And I had a map in hand, and I knew where I was going. So I went and just followed through. There was a section at the wastewater treatment plant that people weren't aware of. If I were to take a square area, there was another square in the back right corner that was all wooded around the whole area. And this is what I was told to look out for. So I went back and I found the area, and believe me when I tell you, it was unbelievable. I found what they called a sludge pit that was the size of an NFL football field. 50 yards wide, 100 yards long, 20 feet deep, it appeared. And as I went around this thing, that was only partially fenced in, and that was one of my biggest concerns when I went out there, because there are neighborhoods all around the wastewater treatment plant. And I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, we were curious about everything, so we'd go anywhere. You know, there are absolutely, at the time, no trespassing signs anywhere. Now, any child could have gone up there and fell into the sludge pit, could have been exposed to raw material that you don't want humans to be exposed to. They may not have even known what it was. I'm sure they didn't know what it was. But one of the other things that I'd seen as I went around the backside, this was the Wicomico River, and the wastewater treatment plant butts to the Wicomico River. And they had built this thing up some 50 feet, 60 feet up. Now I could be wrong on my height, but it's somewhere near there. On the back side of this thing was sandbags that they had mounted 4, 5, 6 high, because the sludge pit was overflowing directly down the hill and into the river. Okay? So I was flabbergasted, and I had my camera, and let me tell you, I took so many pictures it wasn't funny, and I documented things. There was one area that I was down there where there was a natural stream that came out and ran and was probably 10, 12 feet wide, with a natural flow of water running through an area that looked like a creek, a little stream that ran out to the Wicomico River. So I started following it back, and I wanted to find its beginning. So as I went back further and further and further, ultimately I called it the Bat Cave, because there was this little hill that sat there with like this hole and shrubbery around the whole hole. And ultimately, you know, I took pictures of that as well, and I thought, what the heck's going on here? Because then I heard motors going. So I went around that, and when I got around the other side, there was a whole room that I couldn't see inside, of course, but you could hear the engines going, the motors going, and I knew something just wasn't right. So when I got home, I called the Maryland Department of the Environment, and I started explaining to them what I had just experienced. They couldn't believe it. And I said, look, I've got pictures of this whole thing. I own Salisbury News, and I'm about to break this wide open. So they decided to come over to my home immediately. And they drove over, and we sat there with my computer, and I showed them picture after picture after picture. And this guy was just flabbergasted. He could not believe what he was seeing. There was also, next to the sludge pit, 2 humongous mounds of human feces, no plastic liner underneath it, 20 foot high, 2 piles side by side, 20 foot high, where they were drying out human feces. Again, illegal. Sludge pit, illegal. The stream that I had found, ultimately, let me go back to the MDE from that point at my home, got on a phone right there and put together an entire task force of people. And immediately he left my house to meet everyone at the wastewater treatment plant, and they raided that plant and spent 2 days writing up violations, one ticket after another after another. Most people didn't even know anything about it. The Daily Times wouldn't cover it again. And again, this is again why we created Salisbury News, because people just weren't hearing the truth. They didn't know these kind of things were going on. The neighbors in the community, I went door to door after I found this out, and I started showing pictures. I printed them out, and I started showing neighbors who lived at the bottom of that hill that went down towards the river what their homes were exposed to as far as feces and so forth running down on heavy rains. Anytime they got a heavy rain, it just flowed down. When the NDE went out there and started researching it, they found that there were 2 Cat diesel engines that were hooked up to pumps that were illegal wells, that they were running untreated water. The river I told you, the little stream I told you about, it was all man-made, it was all illegal, and it was running directly into the Wicomico River over 1 million gallons a day. Okay, so these are the kind of things, and of course, the next thing you know, I've got threats, I'm being told that I'm going to get arrested because I trespassed. There were no trespassing signs. I was very clear when I got up there. I didn't do any violating of anything. It's public property. And because they didn't post anything, I was allowed to do that. And the funny part that kind of got interesting after the MDE was there was they started posting no trespassing signs around the entire wastewater treatment plant. So I had mentioned that I was going to go up in a plane and see if they actually got rid of the sludge pit. Did they get rid of the piles of human feces and so forth? And believe it or not, the mayor turned around and tried to call for a no-fly zone over the wastewater treatment plant so that I couldn't take pictures from the air. Well, I did it anyway. And we took pictures of aerial views, and we provided that again on the website on sbynews.com. And people got to see, whether it was ground level or whether it was from the air, what progress was being done. The mayor had gone